Hello, everybody. My name is Greg Ansara, and I am from Durif Isle of Man, and we're here to talk about the future of technology and how we incorporate that into our business. And I'll let the panel introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Chris Glethill. I'm the CEO of a company called PDMS, and we're software engineers. And we sort of see our job as really being taking emerging technologies and making them useful to real businesses. So it's a good topic, I think.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Tom. I'm a managing director at a company called eSign, and we provide different software as a service.
Hi, I'm Mike Bromwich. I'm a non-exec of various local tech businesses, including PDMS, Domicilium, and FXC, and a couple of others. I'm a techie, a geek and proud, and I've also just started a new IoT startup called Security.
Hello, I'm Alison Hamilton-Lacey. I'm Managing Director of Red 5 Systems. We're a cloud provider in the Isle of Man. I'm also a non-exec director of other companies too. I'm not a techie. My passion really is IT operations and allowing customers to manage cost-effectively compliance and security.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you, panel. So let me start with a general question, really. Do we think that business leaders understand that technology is the nervous system of the modern day business? And and how do we embrace that?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I do think maybe not a lot of business leaders know that it's the nervous system, but they certainly do have a respect for technology. Now, technology's been inherent in businesses, obviously, for a long time. Unfortunately, what we see, what I see when in my business is a lot of business leaders are reactive to new emerging technologies, and as the previous panel actually mentioned, event-driven. So, for example, what happened over the last 2 years, the need for remote working, so businesses, and this is used a lot in my industry, called digitize or die, which is like where we have to change quickly, they adapt quickly, and for the most part it's successful. But what we're trying to advocate now for businesses is that you start taking a more proactive response and start getting things in place and have a better respect and understanding for technologies.
I think it also depends on the sector, because there used to be technology businesses and other businesses, and now all businesses are technology businesses. So there are certain sectors historically that haven't really had to embrace technology, are having to learn and catch up. But I think the combination of technology and the data that technology creates and captures is now seen as an important asset to almost every business, and so I think it is. We're getting there on that.
I think I'd like to add that as well. It's also the size of the company. I think the larger organisations can afford that investment in skill set. The smaller companies don't always understand how the industries are changing. If you look at like the traditional finance sector, not all of those kind of companies, they understand what's happening in terms of fintech and regtech and even open banking. So I think there's lots of opportunities, but also threats for the existing finance sector.
Yeah, a couple of points were brought up there. Mike said that most businesses are tech businesses, and I think that was one of the points made early on today in some of the keynotes when we talked about businesses which are tech businesses which happen to underwrite insurance, for example, was a term used earlier on. And also the division between, or the challenges of smaller or larger businesses. And actually, large businesses have big challenges with tech. They're just different challenges because they have an awful lot of legacy often that needs to be adapted to a more modern presentation or way of doing business. Just as smaller businesses can't necessarily invest to the same extent, but they may be able to make much better use of off-the-shelf or as-a-service systems that are available in the market more quickly. So there are lots of challenges there, but lots of opportunities at every level. And I think in terms of this specific question, I think really every business knows business should look at its own operation and what it knows and its KPIs and so on to determine where its best opportunities are in tech.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. So obviously, the time that we live in now is really exciting. There's lots of innovation, there's lots of change, and we need to make sure that our businesses adapt. And I heard somebody earlier today say it was the the fourth industrial revolution is, and it's really exciting time. And certainly in terms of technology, for me personally, this is the most exciting time I've had in my career. But how do we as business leaders make sure that we are still engaged with or are engaged with the new technologies that is coming, and how do we know what's around the corner, and how do we keep up to date?
Yeah, I think as Chris touched on, it's quite easy for smaller businesses to make that adoption. And certainly as when our business was growing, it was very easy just to try things. Because you are in close quarters with your team members, it was easy to try and think, yeah, that worked, or no, it doesn't. And then it becomes inherent as you grow. So you incorporate it into your business operations. So every month you have a chat and do a bit of research and development, and it becomes habitual. It's different to manage, and there's different change management processes that come into it. So it's really about, like the previous panel mentioned, getting the right team members in place, getting them educated on new and emerging technologies. As Chris mentioned, data-driven, and look at the data that you need, and more importantly, customer feedback as well. Look what's on the market and a bit of competitor analysis.
Yeah.
I think it's a bit of a cliche, but technology is moving at such a pace. I think even in big organisations, it's important to look for ideas and feedbacks irrespective of where it comes from, because lots of the younger people, even the big enterprises, have good ideas and good concepts and approach a problem in different ways than maybe the senior team would. So being prepared to be open-minded and listen to feedback from across the organisation, I think is important. Ideas often come from areas where you least expect them.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just... So I think one of the great things I've heard about today in one of the other panels is how the best ideas don't come from technologists usually. I mean, one of the things that we're quite passionate is not actually bringing in technology to customers where technology is not needed, or not bringing in technology for technology's sake. The challenge is that marketeers are not usually technologists, and technologies are not usually marketeers. So I think the best ideas usually come from a problem, and that whole approach, as Mike been saying, is that once you've got a problem, is basically exploring and investigating the options for achieving and solving that. One of the best things that we were talking about earlier today is basically how digital health has brought a whole new kind of initiative to solving a traditional problem. The hospice is great in actually embracing one of Memory Lane's solutions in terms of actually using technology to address an issue. It's really great.
I think I'm going to misquote somebody here and say, ask not what you can do for technology, ask what technology can do for you. And I think the key, I think, always is, because none of us can keep in pace with all technology. There's far too much of it. So the key to really getting the best from emerging technologies is to understand what problems, and I think this is essentially what Alison was saying as well, what problems you're trying to solve that technology may help with. So finding out not what people are trying to sell you in terms of the technology, but what the problem it's particularly good at solving is a great way to start.
I was so encouraged earlier to hear the initiative Bettina was talking about there being some kind of project of this is a challenge and let's bring together a collection of people. One of the things you see in other jurisdictions is like a university partnering up with industry to solve problems. And I'd really love to see that go further in the Isle of Man, where you've got the university working with the regulators, working with the digital industry and the finance sector, and say, right, these are real big issues for us, but we've got the opportunity of all of those collaborating, get the youngsters working on new, creative, blue sky thinking ways of solving those problems, and let's go for it.
Yeah, I'd just add to that as well, Alison. There's in different governments, and there's especially certainly in the European Union, there's projects such as Horizon 2020, where it's a cross-jurisdictional / government initiative, and they engage with businesses throughout the whole of Europe to do exactly just that, problem solve. So as well as the universities, you're getting individuals and businesses with a little bit more experience that can and have the resource as well to tackle certain issues that affect everyone.
That's a really good point. I mean, technology solutions don't always fit into existing organisational silos. So, and things like IoT or artificial intelligence and so on, they're often require a completely different group of people to collaborate within a business, or even create a quite different sort of national infrastructure. So there are things about, and I think some of the things we heard earlier on about IoT and the LoRaWAN network, for example, are really good examples where people are trying to be a bit creative, or where government is being a bit creative in looking at creating a basis for innovation, which doesn't necessarily fit existing business models.
Well, things like IoT in particular, it creates such interest and excitement among students and kids in schools. So, give them a stream of data, give them a box full of IoT kit to play with, and they'll solve problems that were well outside the original scope that stuff was deployed for. And it's so accessible, it's so instant gratification. They plug these things together, turn them on, press a button, and they're generating results and data. So IoT is one of those spaces where it's almost like going back to the late 80s, early 90s of the home computer. Hobbyists are playing with things and achieving things well beyond what they expected to.
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, that actually leads quite nicely on to the next question, which is about data. And much of the decisions that we make are about the data that we collect, whether it's IoT or just with our internal systems. How do we know we're collecting the right data? And a lot of the decisions that we make are obviously machine learning and AI, and that is only as good as the data that's collected. So I always worry that the data might be wrong in the first place, or we're collecting the wrong data. What do you guys think about, or how do we ensure the integrity of the data that we've collected?
I would say you're collecting the right data if it's either maximising your opportunities with your clients, or it's solving a problem, or it's bringing efficiency improvements. So if you're not looking at it and it's not achieving one of those things, then basically don't collect it.
Yeah, it's sometimes difficult to tell, isn't it, at the outset? But at the end of the day, if you're collecting data in aggregate, and as a result, you're making decisions and taking actions which are proving to be effective, then the data is good enough. It's achieving a goal. Particularly when you're looking at statistical measures and counts of data, it doesn't have to be exactly right to generate value. It just has to be sufficiently right to support the decisions you're trying to make.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. So as a business leader, you kind of get a feel for it as well, and it's what are you looking for? The data hasn't just popped out at you. You've implemented the system. Why? So I always ask, well, what is it that I'm looking for? What is it that I need? So is it the number of people that have come onto a trial? Okay, that's one bit of information. Then you'll expand it a bit further. How many have converted? In what time frame? Where are they from? And then you can build it up. The great thing about technology now is all this data and AI, it's readily available for everyone, businesses large and small. And there's a lot of great CRM systems out there that you can try, and you can put your initial requirements in for the data and it will gather it for you. And when you, as a business, you're more confident, you can add to that and then really drill down.
Yeah, be very aware of the data you haven't got, is what I would say. Because any organisation will have data which is biased in some way. If it's customer feedback, you only get feedback from your own customers, and so on. So just be aware. It's a tool. It's not an oracle, necessarily. And make sure that the data you collect reflects the questions that you're trying to answer. And don't be frightened. This is another really important point. There's an enormous resource of freely available public open data, which can be a massive resource as well. You don't have to have generated it within your own business.
I think there's quite a few occasions recently where data was collected for one purpose and it proves to be useful for another. I was reading about a case study for a smart metering project in Germany a few years ago, and it was put in place obviously to be able so an electricity and energy company can bill their customers. But it also proved to be useful in terms of monitoring vulnerable people, because if people's activities change and they don't put the kettle on, they don't turn the lights off, that could be detected from changes in the smart meter, in the profile of data consumed. So I think over time, as we instrument the world and capture data on almost everything, we'll be able to put that to applications that weren't even conceived at the outset of the project.
Things that we don't even know about now. Yeah. All right. So the thing about technology is that it very often disrupts and changes industries, and has an opportunity to do that again and again. And in particular, when an industry is disrupted, it's often done so by a small business. And small business has an opportunity to use technology to level the playing fields, to disrupt big industries. They're able to implement technology more nimbly than bigger industries. How do you see that playing out, or do you see that happening more and more? Or,
I think the whole as-a-service model really plays into the hands of small organisations because it gives them access to capabilities that just, 10 years ago were only going to be available to large enterprise. So that means, without a huge capital investment, they can get going, get access to facilities. They can try things without taking a big risk. If you think about just, a simple application like accounting, if you've taken a subscription out with something like QuickBooks, you can then integrate into your bank and have full enterprise-grade integration and tracking of your finances without, a many £100,000 capital project, which is what we required before. So I think the as-a-service economy is a great leveler.
That's a great pitch for our cloud computing, which is obviously what we make our, apologies, where we make our money. But it's the ability to scale up and down at a flick of a switch. So if a company is succeeding, it can grow rapidly, and if it's struggling, it can flex back and go into a different area.
Yeah, I mean, any business, large or small, most as-a-service models now is scalable or designed to descale as well. In terms of larger businesses, like smaller business come, try it, like it, or don't, and move on. With larger businesses, there's got to be more of an investment in time. We try to, I know the word's used quite a lot, but it is really relevant, digital transformation. So when we have larger enterprises, and I'm sure my colleagues will agree with this, come to us, they ask for a specific thing, like, we need this. Okay, that's interesting. Why? And then you go on from there, and then you try and make sure that you put them on the right path and make them aware that there is an investment of not just money but time to make sure that you have the right fit with the software that you need.
And I think there's another thing to think about here, which is that it's not just about small businesses disrupting, it's also about jurisdictions. I think one of the opportunities for the Isle of Man, and what this conference is kind of all about, is the ability to be a bit disruptive in perhaps regulatory areas and other areas where we can come up with a better model. And equally, the sort of digital infrastructure I was kind of alluding to earlier on around things, well, the sort of thing that Tom does, for example, with e-sign, the ability to move to a much more digital approach to transactions, the legal certainty, digital identity, and so on, makes it possible to do business globally from a small rock in the Irish Sea. And that's disruptive too.
So one of the things that we're seeing a lot with companies on the Isle of Man is the cost of regulation going up. It might be professional indemnity, it might be just the license cost. And so that's bringing a lot of pressure for those regulated entities on the Isle of Man at the moment. So if there were smart solutions which were held in the Isle of Man, that people could actually share those costs, then that would bring opportunities to the Isle of Man. But the flip side, it also brings competitors to the Isle of Man because the cost of regulation comes down, so the barrier to entry comes down as well. So opportunities and risks.
Thanks. So just the flip side of my original question, which is how do small businesses adapt and disrupt bigger industries with technology? The other side of the coin is how do big incumbent businesses that have been around for some time and have a huge amount of technical debt use modern day technology or current technology to reinvent themselves and disrupt themselves?
I think one important point there is to make a proper judgment about what really is technical debt and what is just a mature asset. There's lots of businesses who look at platforms that have been in place 20, 30 years and they sort of assume that their end of life have to be replaced. Whereas the actual mechanics of the business haven't hugely changed. The value of the data and the sort of analysis was done in terms of structuring that data is still sound. And it's entirely possible at times to put that lipstick on that pig, if you like, and utilise those assets and consider them heritage rather than legacy.
Yeah, I like the use of the word heritage, but I mean, Mike's absolutely right. The structure, the information structures that most large organisations have are a reflection of what they do, bank accounts, whatever. And quite a lot of that stuff doesn't really change that much. So being prepared to look at how to integrate systems differently rather than throw them out is a way that you can really cut across that apparent difficulty.
I would say look at where the problems are, the problem areas are. So often those can manifest themselves in the way that company's customers are interfacing or interacting with them. I can think of a situation a good few years ago where we were working with one of the e-gaming companies, and basically they were struggling with the experience for the users throughout the world and the fairness of it. And because technology is changing all the time, we were basically able to develop a solution that re-engineered how they actually monitored the experience of those users. So I think my answer to that would be look at basically problem areas, particularly problems for their customers.
Yeah, and just to touch on what Alison said earlier about regulation, it's a lot more difficult for bigger businesses to change and rip out the technology. And like Chris said, it's not necessary all the time. You can have a symbiosis between what you've got in place and just look at new bolt-ons and other as-a-service models that will supplement it, improve the security of it, and really then get the most out of your asset.
Cool, thank you. So the Isle of Man has been focused on bringing new industries to the island, and we've done that a number of times. How can we focus on enhancing the current industries that we've currently got on the island, and promote innovation and develop what we've currently got?
I think that's all.
Go on.
Go on, Chris.
I think we've all talked about the same, really. I think this is one of those situations where, and this is kind of what this panel should be about, which is tech and digital innovation as a way to support all business. And the starting question, which was all about, well, how do businesses get the benefit of technology? That's kind of the core of this. And similarly, as a technology industry, our job is to ensure that what we do facilitates all businesses, essentially, particularly those which have the capacity to grow and scale, regardless of what they actually do. So, to me, there's an element here of that kind of national digital initiative, which is about enhancing all industries, and I think that's a very important sort of goal for us to have as an island.
That plays into skills as well a lot, doesn't it? I mean, at the end of the day, it's been talked about a lot today, and justifiably skills. A lot of the businesses here, which could thrive further and could develop further, are being hampered by technical skills. And I think that some of the skills are quite horizontal across sector. Software skills in general underpin IoT, e-gaming, and lots of other things, but they're also valuable to every other industry too. So any effort that we put into that foundation of skills will benefit businesses which are coming to the island and businesses which are already here looking to grow.
So from my side, I think I observe in some areas companies don't want to talk to each other in the same industry because they want to keep it confidential. They're worried about sharing intellectual property. But there are a lot of commonalities which people are prepared to talk about, and things like cost of security, cost of compliance, and those are issues for the sectors and are issues for the regulators. So I think we've already said it, and they've already recognised it. It's about working together, identify what the problems are, and get some bright people involved in actually coming up with new business models and using the technology to solve those things.
Yeah, I think the foundations, case in point, this event, the foundations are here for a great future to help companies thrive in a digital environment. And I think, as we've all mentioned, the collaboration is key. If you look at the GitHub model, for example, where you think like there's a lot of proprietary information and stuff, but in that community, it's a community of developers, and they openly share ideas, and it is literally for the betterment of digital advancement. And I think something like that here would really thrive.
I think the point that Alison was making about collaboration to solve common problems which are not directly driving competition, so particularly around things like compliance. There are lots of opportunities for that kind of thing in, say, the finance sector, where a joint investment in something which supports a group of companies will make them all more competitive globally. I think that's a really good point.
And finally, we've got just a few minutes left. And this is a big question, so I don't expect an amazing answer. We've only got a few minutes, but what can the Isle of Man government or Digital Isle of Man do to help industry embrace technology in the near future?
Educate. I think these kind of forums are great. There's a lot of digital industry people here, so it would be great actually if there's something a bit more targeted to each of the sectors.
Yeah, there's things like if you want to promote a business on Ireland to sell or engage further afield, it's about harmonising the regulation and assisting those businesses with things that you can't. They've got to get their own house in order in terms of. So if I want to sell off Ireland further afield, what standards are over there? So if you look at ISO, Cyber Essentials, and other governments provide portals where businesses can go and do a checklist without the heavy expenditure of a consultant and go through and make sure that they've got a good foundation to sell and move forward.
Yeah, I think international standards and being up there in terms of regulation and standards is just as important as targeting individual sectors.
Yeah, and I think that things like, there are aspects where policy is important. I think that and the whole Isle of Trials concept, I think, is really good. Areas where the geography and the structure of the island makes us a great test bed to platform and to test new opportunities, which then become exportable lines of business in their own right. I think government support there has proved in the past to be really useful and really successful, and certainly encourage that to be the same going forward.
Yeah, and you all forgot to mention running events like this. Yeah? Yeah. Right, I think there are no questions on Slido. I don't think. Nope. Right, so thank you very much. Thank you very much, panel.